Hello, today is July 2nd, 2019. This is the standard SIG cluster lifecycle meeting. I'll go ahead and share my screen. If you could add your details to the meeting notes, that would be useful. Also, if you have topics that you want to discuss, please add them in the appropriate subsection and we'll try to make sure we address them in this meeting. So, walking through from the top of the list. First up was a follow-up from the several notices that I've given over time and time again that we, today is the day to vote for with regards to the image builder proposal. So if you haven't had a chance to look at it, I've had the link in there several times and I have to go back in time to figure out where it is. My plan is to address the current comments. I think there's been some minor ones here. I just wanted to make sure I batched it all up to just shuffle some text around. And then from there, go ahead and green light it. So the typical standard operating procedure we do with this is we put the proposal up, we give feedback, then we do a lazy consensus vote. So if you could use chat, we'll do a timeout of like about 1.5 minutes or so. And if there's any last comments, questions, complaints, concerns, please raise them now. So I will. Could the loud typer please mute? So I will stop. I will mute my. Right. I will mute my section right now. And if folks want to do a +1, -1 in chat, or if you have comments, please raise them now.
Looks like a fair amount.
Yeah, it looks like we have critical mass. If there are any last comments, what I'll do is I will update the CAP, and if there's any last comments, please, we'll do lazy consensus merge by the end of the week. I do know it's a holiday, but it's that way I'll do the update today. And if there are no issues, then I will do the formal logistics stuff I need to do with repo organization and whatnot. In the next meeting, we can talk about the details of where everything is. All right. Next up, state of CAP v ownership and CAP star providers. This was an action item follow-up. I know that I don't see Fabio on the call, but that was one of the topics that he had brought up. And I know, Justin, you had mentioned wanting to make sure that we had parity there too as well. Has there been any progress on any of this?
I don't know of. I have not been following this. I did check so that the CAP-G and everything else is under SIG cluster lifecycle. So it does feel like moving. I can't remember which one was under discussion. Was it VMware? Yeah, that would make a ton of sense to just put under SIG cluster lifecycle, and there shouldn't be any issue.
Okay. All right. I will follow up with Fabio offline, and then we'll see where that is at. The next follow-up item was with regards to the new contributor meeting for the component config group.
Yep. Is Lee here? Cool.
Hi.
Okay, maybe not. Yeah, cool. And then you can talk about it.
You posted a doc? I haven't seen this yet.
No, it's just a link to the mailing list. So
I see.
yeah, in short, Lee sent out a doodle for coordinating on a best time for this onboarding meeting. So maybe in what should we say, 2-3 days from now, we can collect the results and go with it. Probably next week sometime. And yeah, hope to see folks there.
Yeah.
So
we've had quite a few people already post portions of their schedule. I believe I made the doodle for a span of something like 12 days. So please fill out all of the days so that it merges.
I think one of the things that might help awareness of this, most people don't really realize that component config is the way we're trying to standardize how to do customizations for deployments. And there's been some high profile tweets basically around people trying to figure out how to do customization of their environment. I don't know if it requires awareness, documentation, some type of like maybe a blog post to get more eyeballs in this space, because I know that's been kind of the problem. It might be useful, I think, to describe what is, like, to have a blog post describe what is what is the component config, what are we trying to do, why it's so important. I think that will probably up level the conversation.
I could not agree more.
I could help with the blog posts. That's one of the final things I do for the group. Yeah, that's a good idea. Who's up for? It's Caitlin that is managing the blog post, or is it George? We should talk about. Talk to.
My other laptop downstairs.
I think it's Caitlin still. I would still sync with George too, because he'll help with the logistics.
Cool. Lee, what do you think?
Do we want to get that out very soon? Because if so, we'll need to move the doodle if we're planning to do that before the onboarding meeting.
I think we could do the onboarding meeting before anyways.
Yeah.
I don't see that as blocking.
I mean,
but rather it would be better.
Yeah,
if we had done it before, we could just link that. So here's awareness blog post and then link the onboarding session. So if people want to see how it works.
Yeah, because we already have enough interest. I believe,
It's in my bag.
onboarding session.
Yep. Cool.
All right, any other last questions, comments, complaints, concerns there? Next up was a follow-on from last time, which was that we were talking about, we have a couple of long-term action items, one of which was to retire DIN and the other was removing the /cluster directory. I did not do any updates with regards to the /cluster directory, although I'm going to plan to start to triage that issue this week. So maybe that's an action item for me. I did open an issue with the Dyn folks and tagged Ivan. And what I'm going to try to do is hammer out any details, any logistics that we need to on this particular issue. So if folks have questions, comments, complaints, concerns, this should be the issue that we should follow up on.
Tim, specifically on the getting rid of the cluster directory. So that's one thing that I was looking a little bit into. It seems that from my initial looking at it, that a lot of the work is going to be sort of identifying places in, say, the documentation that refer to scripts and pieces that are in the cluster directory and sort of replacing that documentation with more upstream recommended approaches for things. Is that correct, or at least a good chunk of that work is like that?
That's a piece of it. I don't know if that's a good chunk of it. That we should not be referencing those documents at all really anymore, right, because it's been deprecated for eons. But that is a definite to-do item on the list. In fact, I think that would probably should be like the first things we should do, which would be low-hanging fruit that anyone could execute on.
Yeah, low-hanging fruit for folks like me, first getting started. So yeah, there's a few places in the documentation that I've identified as referring to various pieces and parts of the cluster scripts.
Yeah, and that shouldn't be there anymore because it's deprecated, not even recommended. So.
Okay, well, that's definitely something I can focus on.
Any other questions with regards to retiring the cluster directory? If not, the next one I just left over from last time, which was last time we came across a list, which is down here, of the proposed sessions we wanted to have, deep dives and intros for KubeCon North America. I think the only reason to follow up today is to see if there's any other last questions or comments, complaints, concerns about if we should do A or B. Well, if you want to, feel free to asynchronously add details here. I think given the maturity of some of these, we may want to roll them up, I don't know, into other talks. It's a possibility until we actually have a formal release. And then once we have a formal release, we might want to make them have their own session.
For example, workgroup components then could get its own intro anyways by their own name or umbrella. So I think that should be fine.
Right. So if you have comments, please add this to this section here. We can do that asynchronously, and I can follow up offline. It looks like, Lucas, you might have been typing down below. Action and follow up on?
Follow up on the graduating owners, approvers, that kind of stuff for some projects.
We've already done that for KubeADM. I think Cluster API did that last cycle too, because they're a little bit off kilter with regards. And I believe add-ons also did that recently, because I got poked on that couple of issues with Justin. I don't know about other projects. I do know that etcd-ADM was looking for more reviewers and approvers there. Are there any other comments from other folks on other sub-projects?
Yeah, I was thinking mostly about the other ones that I don't know about. So you said Cluster API did its last cycle. They're off schedule. For example, how about COPS and CubeSpray, Minikube?
Can you clarify what the ask is? What are we talking about?
So I was thinking about, like, so we concluded last meeting with that it's good to graduate, for example, members to reviewers and reviewers to approvers, and maybe also approvers to sub-project owners in owners files. And we tend to we encourage sub-projects to do it once every cycle. And as Tim pointed out, different projects have different cycles. So for example, Cluster API is not running the same schedule as KubeADM. But anyways, what kind of schedule makes sense for COPS, for example, or CubeSpray? And was there any graduation of people there?
It's a good idea. COPS, we do it sort of as needed, which basically means that we forget. So I really like the idea that and someone has to sort of ask. I really like the idea of doing it on a schedule. We have not done it on a schedule, but we have been promoting people recently, or moving them up the levels, I guess. And I would say I've never regretted anyone that we have like moved up the levels. So it is a good thing to definitely do. Like there's always the fear that you like promote someone and they do something bad, but that has never happened in my experience.
Usually, we follow the chop wood, carry water philosophy. So the people who do the hard work get promoted typically.
Cool. We can, if other sub-projects, folks from other sub-projects can fill in during we can proceed. But there are a couple projects missing information about, so that's an action item.
Yeah, maybe we can follow up asynchronously. I don't see some
Yeah.
people on the call, so. Yeah.
Cool. The next one.
I also don't see anyone from Cube Spray on the call, I don't think, right now. But let's go through the sub-project working group updates. I'm guessing Lubomir or Fabrizio wrote in the first section.
Yeah, Fabrizio, do you want to go or?
Okay, so just we define planning for kubeadmin and for this cycle. P0 is to is a focus on security. We had some issue in backlog and also CIS report that signaled something. So basically, the goal is to investigate all this issue and identify a set of actionable items for this cycle. And this is P0. Then we have some P1, which is dependency cleanup, that is a work aimed at moving kubeadmin out of the KK repo. And also we have a work on customization, running a cluster or changing an existing cluster. We will start writing a cap and trying to scope down this problem that is huge to something actionable. And that's what we have in pipeline for the next cycle as P0, P1, and then there are a lot of P2s that we will work according to availability of persons. Tomorrow we will do another walk through the backlog, starting to clean up and keeping things ordered and sane. And a PSA, we are going to remove V1 beta 1, but according to the deprecation cycle, this will happen in 1.18, and there is no planned change in the kubeadmin API for this cycle. At least nothing. There is no yet critical mass of requests. Also, the kubeadmin blog post linked to the 5 blog posts for release went out 1 or 2 weeks ago, and that's it. That's all for kubeadmin.
Any questions for Fabrizio? I highly recommend the pattern that we've been doing for KubeADM for other sub-projects in the beginning of the cycle, and it's also documented. So if I go to Kubernetes, gosh, I don't have a handy link. If you go to the community webpage and you go underneath SIG cluster lifecycle, there is a separate section for grooming where you plan your milestones and then you go through the process of triaging your issues, and then you do continuous breakdown as part of your standard office hours meetings. And we also talk about, this last section here about during the end of milestone, evaluating whether or not you should do a promotion of folks. This pattern has proved itself very fruitful. So this is more like a PSA to follow as we talk about planning. Any other questions there? Go once, twice, 3 times. Next up, cluster API. I don't know who wrote that. Do you want to put their name there?
I wrote it. So 3 PSAs, we have had 3 releases like in the past week. CAPI has been released for like 0.14, which brings node ref changes. We have a new controller that like actually adds the node references, and we have more events that the users can consume on the machine set and machine deployments. Cluster API AWS provider has been released 0.33 to support the node ref changes, and we also have CAPV released at 0.30. And there have been a lot of changes in CAPV. I'll suggest to look at the extensive release notes that Andrew Katz put together. So props to them for the great work. And I believe CAPV is now at the same feature parity with Kappa. So that's actually a great milestone for the project. Any questions here?
So 2 questions. One question, at least for the broader audience, is like version scheme. That's a pretty confusing version scheme. I don't think anyone besides the people who are working on the project would understand what that means. So like what is 0.14 and why does that translate to a v03.3?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Kappa and I think also Kappa V went to some breaking changes, and so we upped the version number there. I do agree that like there's a need for like a little bit more consistency here, and we might want to tackle this for V1 Alpha 2. And
so each of the providers should have, as part of their main README, a table that shows the compatibility between the versions for the provider and with Cluster API proper itself.
Still, to an external consumer, we need to get this right. That's I'm going to say that's not good enough. We need to have a version schema across the components that is friendly for external consumers, because otherwise consumers will have no idea of what the version matrix support is.
Yeah, one of the things we have to keep in mind, and this is some that we ran across both with the AWS provider and the vSphere provider, is that there may be breaking changes to the provider that still run with the same kind of API version for upstream cluster API. So while it's relatively easy for common cluster API to stick with the kind of API types we define for the minor version at this point, we can't necessarily rely on that for the AWS provider or the vSphere provider. So for the AWS provider itself, we had to change the way that we were labeling instances within the AWS API because it was causing issue with the integrated cloud provider with Kubernetes. So that introduced a breaking change there, but it's still, we still kept working against the same functional version of Cluster API. So whatever we define needs to be able to handle those types of changes as well.
I think we should probably take this offline, but focus on maybe addressing this in a V1 Alpha 2. It has to be addressed before beta, before broader consumption for sure. But maybe addressing this in the V1 Alpha 2 plus timeframe to have a common version schema across providers. So that's a little. When people do an update here, it'll make more sense for a consumption model, because some people just want to be consumers. They don't want to know how the sausage is made.
I'll add to like an action item to tomorrow's to talk about this. We have Cluster API meeting tomorrow. Cool. For V1 Alpha 2, the V1 Alpha 2 types have been merged. One of the biggest change has been to change the domain, which has changed from cluster.case.io to cluster.6.case.io. The V1 Alpha 1 types are still gonna be in the older domain for now, unless like we have like a strong reason to bring them to the newer domain. That will complicate a lot, like upgrade paths and stuff like that. And we're currently working on the controllers. So we're just like kind of like working on the business logic.
Question on that. Sorry.
Yeah.
Do we? I think I raised a question on who was driving this. Did we find out who was the person that thought we should not be a case.io domain?
There was a conversation in the API review Slack channel about it. I can
dig that up. Thank you.
Yeah.
We actually CC'd you on it.
But it's Slack. Slack is like Twitter. You know, once it becomes popular, it ceases to be useful.
It's a good approach. And one other thing for V1 Alpha 2, I will post a message like in the next either next week or this week to just like pair with someone. If someone is interested in pairing on working on V1 Alpha 2, I would be willing to kind of like give the time to just like onboard like newcomers or like people that just want to learn more. And this is I'm just gonna go. And the other item that I have is kind of like a PSA from Chuck, which has been working on the cluster API provider for Docker, and we're looking for more contributors. And please ping him on Slack or on the cluster API channel to like know more about it.
So the screen is a little slow to refresh from what Tim is sharing. Lucas added a question. Can we quickly say why we have this provider? Why do we need it? What problem does it solve? And the nice thing about the Docker provider for Cluster API is that it lets us do a relatively self-contained test of all of Cluster API without needing to pay for cloud resources. So it's a nice way. We're using it with the upgrade tool, for example, as an integration test to see if the upgrade tool works or not. And I realize it certainly can't cover all our cases when you do have real cloud resources, but it's a nice thing to have, at least for initial testing.
Thank you.
And I added the next item, which is that we're going to start creating tasks as GitHub issues for the kubeadm Bootstrap provider. And I believe we decided that we're going to do that in the Cluster API repo instead of the separate one that we have.
I think we actually decided to do it separately.
Oh, I thought we decided in. Okay. I recall not that, or just don't remember. So, yeah.
And will the kubeadm Bootstrap provider be generic enough to bootstrap or integrate with pretty much any Cluster API provider?
So this Bootstrap provider will generate cloud init style user data, most likely, to bootstrap your machines. So assuming you have a server that supports cloud init, that's going to be our first our first approach.
Cool. Any other updates, comments, questions? Cluster API.
Once, twice, 3 times. Sold. Next up, add-ons. Justin or Lee?
I put some comments on here, but Lee, I'm happy for you to take it away if you want to. Otherwise, you said go ahead. All right. So basically, we had a meeting last week, and basically we're open for business. We merged one of the sort of strawman PRs, and we're sort of pursuing that approach. The idea is that we're trying to be very focused on like a real world use case because the whole space of add-ons is so broad that without like actually getting concrete, it becomes almost impossible to make any progress. So we've merged a PR. It's not perfect by any means, and we are looking into like extending it to make it more perfect. So for example, I am working on tooling to generate add-ons. I think Jeff Johnson was looking at updating to kubefooter 0.2. I think Daniel and Lee are looking at, or I think Daniel's mostly looking at docs, and I think Lee is mostly thinking about a KEP right now, and I'm sure people are also going to do other things as well. But that's sort of the big headlines I think that people were talking about working on last week. And our sort of current like medium-term goal that we're aiming towards is to produce an add-on operator for something that kubeadm, kops, kubespray, like basically big installation tools will choose to integrate, that they'll want to integrate. And a likely candidate for that, we suspect, is the node local DNS. We're not there yet, but that is sort of, we're trying to get to a place where we produce something that is valuable and sort of solves real problems, and such that the installation tooling would want to install it, would choose to install it.
Is there a time frame? Because I do know that we didn't prioritize this high. I think it's like P2 or lower on 116 for KubeADM cycle.
Do you mean the add-on operators, or do you mean node local DNS?
I think node local DNS is the first deliverable for add-on operators that we would.
Okay,
assume.
cool. Yeah.
So
we don't have a time frame per se. I would expect that we would have something in the 116 in this release cycle. Whether or not it will be compelling enough for tooling to adopt, I don't yet know.
Okay. Any other questions for the add-ons, folks? Going once, twice, 3 times. Okay.
Cool. So for component config and the component standard working group, we did cancel our meeting this morning. There was no preconceived agenda. And yeah, as far as work that's happening right now, we have things that are pending API machinery review that we need to kind of poke at again. And then we have a new contributor, I believe is on the call, who's beginning work on legacy flag integration with kubeproxy and then eventually kubeadm. So that's taking some of Mike Toffin's work to distill our approach to flags into a vendorable library in the legacy flag repository, and then consolidating and standardizing that approach in the existing components so that we have an actual way to think about that, maintain it, and eventually deprecate it. And then, again, as mentioned earlier, the meeting time scheduling doodle is up for the contributor onboarding meeting. So we're going to try to get a blog post out about that, but please update your schedules there if you would like to attend and are interested in contributing. We'll try to make that as useful of a session as possible. And if you are not able to join, we'll make sure it's recorded. Thanks. Questions? Cool. All right.
Next up, COPS. Justin?
Hello, yes. So I think our big thing that is probably of most interest generally is that we think, getting closer to being able to distribute our artifacts, which are both containers and binary artifacts, through the working group Kate's infrastructure, which is spinning up, I believe. That's sort of the end of that process is on the horizon, as it were. And so I think the next thing that we're now sort of thinking about is how we do more automated releases. I think this is something that cross-cuts across all the projects. We talked a little bit about what that would actually mean in practice. I think the dream that, we have a GPG signed tag that like kicks it all off is a nice dream, but it's probably not achievable in the short term. And so we probably will do a sort of tag with some sort of manual type promotion that is kicked off by someone based on that tag as the first step. But I would love to, I don't know where the right venue is to figure out how we should do these releases, because this isn't purely a COPS concern, and I don't know whether this is the right venue or somewhere else.
We don't own that. The working group infra is probably the proper place because they're supposed to take ownership, at least temporarily, of all of that automation.
Yeah, okay, that's good feedback. I would suggest that to date they have mostly been focused on building the infrastructure rather than how you drive it. But I will see how they feel, I guess.
I mean, somebody needs to own it. We can't own this infra because it cuts across the whole project.
Agreed. It's almost like it could be a sub-project of SIG release or something like that. But yeah, I just didn't know whether there was it's clear that COP should not own it. And I don't know who should. But I mean, I think the way we do it traditionally is, kops builds something, cluster API builds something. We sort of look at where we are and see what works and what doesn't, and then we pick the best of all the various worlds that have been built. But
Yeah.
I don't know where we.
Putting on my SIG release hat, I would say this belongs as a sub-project of SIG release.
Cool. Thanks, Caleb.
Or rather, I would happy to sponsor this as a sub-project
Yes.
of SIG release.
But I should probably bring it up in SIG release and we can discuss it there, type thing.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah, the human encabulator of poking you to get something updated for cluster API is not the best thing in the world.
And the cops people share that same need to poke. So yes, I am personally motivated.
Yeah. All right. Any questions, comments, complaints, concerns with regards to cops? Going once, twice, 3 times. I do not see Antoine on the call. Is there anyone who wants to give a brief Kube spray update? I'll take silence as no. Same for Minikube. I don't see Thomas on the call. Again, we'll move on. etcd ADM, I see Daniel adding things in there.
Yeah. Justin, do you want to say anything, or do you want me to just cover these items?
You go first.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. So we had a meeting last week. That was great. Had actually, I think more people attending than at least I expected from the Doodle. Great input, and we made some decisions around what to do first. Number one, I think request was to create a types for etcd ADM, Kubernetes style configuration versioned, and so that's something that we'll start working on. Also, I'm working on getting tests running. So these would be sort of end-to-end tests using probably not kind, but a kind of a variation on that with containers that have systemd enabled. And I know that kind uses the same idea as does Moshe's config ADM. So that should work with Prow. That'll give us some signal, just like end-to-end etcd ADM init, join, and so forth, and then we can get fancier, from there. And then I'm working on supporting etcd ADM init from an existing data directory. This is one of the ways that you can recover a cluster that has failed, in case you don't have a snapshot, or you prefer not to use a snapshot because it's outdated, but you have access to the state of at least one of the members. So that's another item. And then I think support for concurrent joins, which is something that Lubomir, I think, is added to kubeadm. And anyway, it didn't according to the etcd documentation, that wasn't supposed to work in all cases, but it looks like it will, and it's sort of a bug that became a feature. So I think that'll be probably useful for especially for integrating etcd ADM to some kind of larger automation where you just want to kick off maybe a bunch of control plane replicas and just have them join.
Do you have a time frame for like a potential initial cut release, similar to the add-ons folks question?
That's a good question. Off the top of my head, I don't. I think to at least do like, let's say, the end-to-end tests and the version configuration, I think that seems like reasonable within a month time frame. I don't know, to pad it a little bit. I don't know, Justin, you have more experience. If you want to, if you want to
I'd say I think one thing we should mention is like the CLI experience, the basic CLI experience works great, right? And you're running that,
yes,
as I understand it. Yes. So like there is a baseline functionality that works, and we are talking about, additions to that functionality.
That's true. Yeah.
Yeah, I think in the fullness of time, having a single tool that manages the lifecycle of etcd in a Kubernetes style fashion is super important for the project. But it's also the in the fullness of time. I say that a lot because sometimes things take a while. The question I'm going to have is that currently the way we do etcd management in the main repository, for better or for worse, mostly for worse, is we have a couple of core contributors who track etcd. Do you have anybody from the etcd group working with you, or have you reached out to them to potentially have them be more engaged? Because I know some of them currently work for Amazon, and I know Jay's on the call, so I can poke twice.
I haven't. I've talked to some of the contributors, but I haven't. I haven't. I think they're aware of etcd ADM, but yeah, I haven't asked them to sort of join. But I think that'll be a good idea.
I think it's a really good idea, particularly with the people that are working on like some of the functionality, like non-voting members, which should really make non-learners. Thank you. It should make a lot of this much more, like some of the automated stuff, a lot more robust. So I think that would be great to have them like add that functionality into etcd ADM, right?
Okay. Is that an AI for you, Tim, or because I'm happy to reach out. I've had contact with a couple.
I prefer less action items on me.
Okay, yeah, I'll grab that. I'm happy to grab that. Also, I guess Justin, Joe Betts, I think is his name.
Mm-hmm. Joe does.
He's a Googler. I don't know if that makes it easier for you to reach out to him. I've spoken with a couple of people, a couple of maintainers, so maybe we can both do it.
I think the reason why I think this is so important is because we live in perpetuity in releases, sometimes with some terrible, terrible bugs, like catastrophic failure bugs. So at least we have in the past. And there are some that still exist today that I can link to. And if we can actually push this into a common location with the core contributors having a release cadence and an absorption policy into like things like kubeadm or other tools, we have a canonical source of truth for, getting stuff, clearing out these terrible bugs. Usually it's been like valiant effort from the people who have encountered them, which is it's never been sustainable. I was one of those people for a long period of time. I've backed away, but it doesn't mean the problem's solved.
Okay. Yeah, get more basically bring more awareness to the etcd maintainers through participation in etcd ADM.
Yeah. Are there any other questions, comments, complaints, concerns with regards to etcd ADM?
I guess the question is, what do you have any recommendations for releasing? Like Justin said, the core functionality is there. People are using it. Like we're using it. In production, it's alpha because it's sort of it's still developing. Like we're going to be moving away from flags to this versioned API, but. So I'm just wondering, like, as far as sending some kind of signal with a release, do you have any recommendations?
I would start talking with the kubeadm folks and potentially aligning on a release boundary in the future. Like there's a lot of innards inside of kubeadm that we would gladly love to not maintain, so long as that we can easily vendor and it's we would just have every cycle the idea of when we would need to update. But it's not on our radar to do this anytime soon. So I think coordinating with them would be useful.
Okay.
and then from there you'd probably release almost on Kubernetes release cadence, because absorption then would be based on a Kubernetes release.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds reasonable. And Lubomir brought up that point at last week's meeting. That there are some that it would be it would be nice to be able to consume etcd-adm perhaps as a library. Although both Justin and I are very feel pretty strongly that the CLI experience is a plus, is a benefit for end users, in order not to like hide this functionality as something that some other component can only make through a function call, but give the ability for users to actually understand and to drive.
I think the answer that's ideal is both.
Yeah.
I mean, if you have component config, you should be able to do it programmatically, and they could still use the tool as well. I think having the story be like, some tool can drive it through automation. This is exactly what we want to do with everything else. Is some tool can drive it through automation using the well-defined configuration in a declarative fashion, and other people can use the CLI in a more imperative way.
Yeah, I think the distinction that I think we're playing around with is the idea that if that automated tooling is non-trivial, like if you imagine the robot that reconfigures etcd for you for a cloud scenario, it can build confidence in the robot if it is expressed as literal command lines that you could yourself run. And also then you the user can look at the logs and learn what it is doing. And also when things go wrong, the user doesn't have to switch modes from power mode declarative driven to more imperative commands that they normally type. But yeah, we haven't built it out yet, so it's a nascent idea.
Yeah.
Justin, when you're describing robots that do etcd stuff, I mean, are you basically describing the etcd operator?
Well, yes, except that the etcd operator relies on, or a traditional operator relies on a Kubernetes API. So we're talking about equivalent functionality that does not necessarily require a Kubernetes API. It does not require etcd to run etcd type thing.
Got it. Okay.
Any other questions? Going once, twice, 3 times. Right. This was an interesting conversation. Are there any other last group topics, things that people wanted to say? Do a last call. Going once, twice, 3 times. All right, we get 11 minutes back. Thanks, everybody. Have a happy 4th of July holiday if you're in the States.
Great.
Ciao.
Bye.